My name is Martha Wilson, and at 65, I thought retirement would mean finally enjoying the fruits of 40 years teaching elementary school. Instead, my son Richard told me I needed to find my own place just weeks after my retirement party. The pain cut deep, but he had no idea about the fortune I had secretly saved all these years. If you've ever been underestimated by someone you love, let me know where you're watching from and subscribe to join me on this journey of standing up for yourself. I became a widow when Richard was only 10 years old. My husband Thomas died of a sudden heart attack, leaving me to raise our son alone. We had been high school sweethearts, married young, and thought we had a lifetime ahead of us. The morning I found Thomas unresponsive beside me changed everything. Suddenly, I was a 35-year-old single mother with a mortgage, a young son, and a teaching salary that barely covered our expenses. Those early years were incredibly difficult. I would wake up at 5 in the morning to prepare breakfast and lunch for Richard, drop him off at school, teach my third graders all day, pick him up from after-school programs, help with homework, make dinner, grade papers, and collapse into bed. There were nights I cried silently into my pillow, wondering how I would manage. But I did. Richard was a good boy back then. He would leave little notes in my lunch bag with drawings of hearts and the words, "I love you, Mom." On particularly rough days, those notes were sometimes the only thing that kept me going. Every decision I made was with his future in mind. I drove the same Honda Civic for 18 years. Our vacations consisted of camping trips or visiting my sister Patricia in Ohio. New clothes came from discount stores or end-of-season sales. What Richard never knew was that beneath my frugal exterior, I was developing a strategic financial plan. A colleague at school, Glenda, had a husband who worked in finance. During a staff potluck, she mentioned how they had started investing small amounts regularly. Compound interest is magic, she told me over paper plates of lasagna. That conversation changed my life. I began reading everything I could about personal finance and investing. I opened an investment account and deposited $200 each month, no matter how tight things were. As years passed, I increased the amount. I lived by a strict budget, cutting corners wherever possible. When other teachers splurged on new cars or fancy vacations, I put that money into my growing portfolio. By the time Richard started high school, my investments were performing remarkably well, but I continued living modestly. Richard and I were close throughout his childhood and teenage years. We had our movie nights every Friday, making popcorn and watching whatever new release he was interested in. I attended every soccer game, every school event. When he got accepted to State University with a partial scholarship, I was bursting with pride. I had enough saved to cover the remainder of his tuition without touching my investment portfolio. Everything began to change during his junior year of college when he met Vanessa. She was studying business administration and came from a wealthy family. The first time Richard brought her home for Thanksgiving, I noticed how she glanced around our modest house with barely concealed disdain. When I served the meal on my everyday dishes rather than fine china, she raised an eyebrow. Richard seemed oblivious, completely enchanted by her. After they married, Richard changed. He became increasingly concerned with appearances. The boy who once was content with simple pleasures now talked about status symbols and making connections with the right people. I watched this transformation with quiet concern but told myself it was natural for children to grow and change, to be influenced by their spouses. When my grandchildren came along, Lily first and then Mason 2 years later, I thought they might bring back some of the old Richard. And for a while they did. I would babysit regularly, cherishing the time with my grandchildren. Lily was artistic like her grandmother, spending hours drawing elaborate pictures. Mason had his grandfather's quick wit and mischievous smile. I loved them fiercely. As my retirement approached, I secretly looked forward to spending even more time with them. I had dreams of taking them to museums, teaching Lily to bake my special apple pie, showing Mason how to build the model airplanes his grandfather had loved. I had carefully planned my finances so I could treat them to special experiences without their parents knowing I was paying. My retirement party at school was bittersweet. 40 years of teaching generations of children had been fulfilling beyond measure. My colleagues presented me with a scrapbook filled with letters from former students, some now adults with children of their own in our school. Principal Donovan gave a touching speech about my dedication. Richard and his family attended, but I noticed he spent most of the event checking his phone, and they left early citing a business dinner. In the weeks following the party, I noticed Richard and Vanessa becoming increasingly distant. When I called to arrange time with the grandchildren, there were always excuses. Lily had ballet. Mason had a play date. They were too busy this weekend. Next weekend might work better. But it never did. I tried not to worry, focusing instead on settling into retirement. I joined a book club at the local library, started volunteering at the animal shelter, and took long walks in the morning instead of rushing to beat the school bell. I was just beginning to enjoy this new phase of life when everything fell apart. The invitation to dinner came on a Tuesday. Richard called, his voice oddly formal, asking if I would come over Thursday evening. When I asked if I should bring a dessert for the kids, he cleared his throat and said, "Actually, Mom, Lily and Mason will be at their friends' houses. Vanessa and I want to talk to you about something important." A sense of unease settled in my stomach, but I pushed it aside. Perhaps they wanted to surprise me with a retirement gift or discuss a family vacation. I spent extra time getting ready that Thursday, putting on my favorite navy blue dress and the pearl earrings Thomas had given me for our 5th anniversary. I arrived at their 2-story colonial precisely at 6. Vanessa opened the door, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Martha, come in," she said, gesturing toward the formal dining room they rarely used. The table was set with their wedding china, but only 3 places. A bottle of wine was already open, breathing. Richard stood as I entered, kissing my cheek without his usual warmth. "Mom, you look nice," he said, pulling out my chair. The small talk felt forced as Vanessa served a roast I barely tasted. After clearing the main course instead of bringing dessert, they both sat down across from me, exchanging a look I recognized from years of parent-teacher conferences. It was the look parents gave each other before delivering difficult news. "Mom," Richard began, folding his hands on the table, "Vanessa and I have been talking, and we think it might be best if you started looking for your own place." The words hung in the air between us. I stared at him, certain I had misheard. "Your own place," I repeated. Vanessa jumped in, her voice smooth as silk. "We just think with your retirement, you might enjoy a smaller space. Something easier to maintain. Perhaps one of those senior living communities with activities and people your own age." "We know your teacher's pension isn't much," Richard added, not meeting my eyes. "And we're prepared to help financially if needed. But with the kids growing, we could really use your room as a home office and playroom." The room seemed to tilt slightly. I had been living with them for only 8 months, after selling my house at their suggestion. "It doesn't make sense for you to maintain a whole house now that you're retired," Richard had said then. "Move in with us until you figure out your next steps." "I see," I said finally, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "And when would you like me to leave?" Another glance between them. "We thought maybe by the end of next month," Richard suggested. "That gives you about 6 weeks to find something suitable." Vanessa smiled tightly. "We've actually already collected some brochures from Sunshine Meadows. It's a very nice senior community about 20 minutes from here. They have a shuttle service for residents who don't drive." The assumption that I would need to rely on a shuttle service stung almost as much as the eviction itself. I had been driving independently for 50 years. The further assumption that I would need their financial help to survive retirement felt like salt in an open wound. "I appreciate your concern," I managed to say, folding my napkin carefully. "I'll start looking right away." The remainder of the evening passed in a blur. I declined coffee and dessert, claiming a sudden headache. As Richard walked me to my car, he attempted to justify their decision. "Mom, it's not that we don't want you around. It's just that at your age, you should be with people who can look after you properly. Vanessa and I both work long hours, and the kids have so many activities." "I understand," I said, though I didn't. The son I had raised would never have treated his mother this way. The drive home was agonizing. Tears streamed down my face as memories flooded back. Richard's first steps, taken toward my outstretched arms. The countless nights I had sat beside his bed when he had ear infections, gently stroking his forehead. The 3 jobs I worked one summer to pay for the computer he needed for high school. The pride in his eyes when I sat in the front row at his college graduation. Where had that Richard gone? And how had I failed to notice he had been replaced by this stranger who saw me as a burden? At home, I pulled out old photo albums and sat staring at pictures from happier times. Thomas holding newborn Richard. Richard's 5th birthday party with the homemade dinosaur cake. I had stayed up all night decorating. His high school graduation, his arm around my shoulders. His wedding day, when I had danced with him, whispering how proud his father would have been. I barely slept that night, my mind racing between hurt, anger, and disbelief. But as morning light filtered through my curtains, something shifted inside me. The pain was still there, but alongside it grew a steely determination. I had raised myself from poverty, put myself through college, survived losing the love of my life, raised a son alone, and educated hundreds of children. I was not going to be discarded like an outdated appliance. I reached for my phone and called a number I hadn't needed to use in years. Gregory Williams' office. A receptionist answered. "This is Martha Wilson. I need to speak with Gregory as soon as possible." "Of course, Mrs. Wilson. Mr. Williams always has time for you. How about 11 this morning?" As I hung up, I felt the first flicker of what would soon become a blazing fire of independence. I decided not to wait the full 6 weeks Richard and Vanessa had generously offered. Why prolong the inevitable? 3 days after our dinner, I confirmed they would both be at work, then packed my belongings methodically. 40 years of teaching had made me organized if nothing else. Clothes went into suitcases, books into boxes, personal mementos wrapped carefully in tissue paper. I left behind the furniture they had insisted I keep when I sold my house, taking only what was irreplaceable. Thomas's watch, our wedding album, the handprints Richard had made in clay during kindergarten, the collection of thank you notes from former students I had kept all these years. On the kitchen counter I left a brief note. "Richard, I've found other accommodations. We'll be in touch soon about seeing the children. Love, Mom." Before leaving, I stood in the doorway of the guest room that had been my home for 8 months. The room that was apparently more valuable as a home office than as a sanctuary for the woman who had given Richard life. I felt a complex mixture of emotions, but refused to shed another tear in that house. The grandchildren would return from school to find me gone. This thought pierced my heart. I had left small gifts on their beds, a book for Lily about a brave girl explorer, a model airplane kit for Mason. I included notes telling them how much I loved them and that I would see them soon. Whether Richard and Vanessa would actually deliver these gifts remained to be seen. I had booked a room at the Pinewood Motel, a clean but basic establishment on the outskirts of town. It wasn't the Ritz, but it would serve as a temporary base while I sorted out my next steps. The young man at the front desk barely looked up as I checked in, certainly not recognizing me as someone who might be worth millions. That first night alone was difficult. The mattress was too firm, the pillow too flat, and the sounds of passing traffic kept waking me. But there was also a strange sense of liberation. For the first time in decades, I was answerable to no one. No papers to grade. No son's schedule to accommodate. No grandchildren to consider, at least temporarily. Just me, Martha Wilson, with the freedom to reinvent myself at 65. Sunday arrived, the day I would normally have joined Richard's family for dinner. Instead, I treated myself to lunch at a small cafe near the motel, savoring a glass of wine with my meal simply because I could. My phone remained silent all day. By evening, I had 3 missed calls from Richard and a text asking where I was. I wasn't ready to respond yet. Monday morning, I dressed carefully in a tailored pantsuit I rarely wore and drove to Gregory Williams' office in the financial district. Gregory had been my financial advisor for 30 years, ever since he was a young man just starting his career. Now he was the managing partner of his firm, with silver at his temples and reading glasses perched on his nose. "Martha," he greeted me warmly, rising from behind his imposing desk. "You look wonderful. How's retirement treating you?" "It's been eventful," I replied, settling into the leather chair across from him. "I need your help, Gregory." Over the next hour, I explained my situation. Gregory listened without interruption, his expression darkening as I described Richard and Vanessa's behavior. "Well," he said when I finished, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose, "let's look at where you stand financially." He turned to his computer, typing rapidly. Charts and numbers appeared on the large screen mounted on his wall. As you know, your investment strategy has been extraordinarily successful. The technology stocks we purchased in the 90s, the real estate investment trusts that tripled during the housing boom, the pharmaceutical companies that took off during the pandemic. He pointed to the bottom line figure. Martha, your net worth currently stands at just over $4.7 million. Even though I received quarterly statements, seeing the number displayed so prominently was startling. From my teacher's salary and widowed mother's frugal living, had emerged a fortune that would have astonished anyone who knew me. Anyone except Gregory, who had watched it grow steadily over 3 decades. So I have options, I said, more statement than question. Gregory smiled. You have many options. You could buy a house outright, travel the world, donate to causes you care about, all while maintaining your principal if that's important to you. I nodded slowly. I'd like to look at houses. Something nice. Not extravagant but comfortable. I can put you in touch with Caroline Peterson. She's a realtor who specializes in upscale properties. Very discreet, which I sense might be important right now. As I left Gregory's office, I felt a newfound confidence. I was not the helpless old woman my son apparently thought I was. I had options, resources, and most importantly, the courage to use them. That afternoon I met Caroline at her office. She was a stylish woman around 50, with a warm smile and an efficient manner. I explained what I was looking for. A beautiful home in an exclusive neighborhood. Something that would be comfortable for me but also suitable for entertaining, particularly 2 young grandchildren. I have several properties that might interest you, she said after listening carefully. When would you like to start looking? Immediately, I replied. The first week of house hunting yielded nothing that felt right. The second week, Caroline took me to a neighborhood I hadn't considered, slightly farther from Richard's home but undeniably beautiful. The house was a craftsman style with exquisite woodwork, a gourmet kitchen, and a backyard with a pool and garden. It's above your stated budget, Caroline warned as we pulled into the circular driveway. I smiled. Let's see it anyway. The moment I walked through the front door, I knew. This was where I would begin my new life. The soaring ceilings, the wall of windows overlooking the garden, the built-in bookshelves that would house my beloved collection. I made an offer that afternoon, and it was accepted the next day. While waiting for the closing, I began venturing beyond my motel room more frequently. I discovered a community center nearby that offered various activities for seniors. During a watercolor class, I met Eleanor Bradshaw, a retired surgeon with a quick wit and infectious laugh. First time painting? She asked, noticing my tentative brushstrokes. First time doing anything just for myself in about 40 years, I admitted. Something in my tone must have revealed more than I intended, because Eleanor studied me with shrewd eyes. Sounds like there's a story there. Want to get coffee after class? Over coffee that stretched into lunch, I found myself sharing parts of my story with this virtual stranger. Not everything, certainly not the financial details, but enough that she understood I was at a crossroads. Men can be such disappointments, she said, stirring her tea. Even the ones we raise ourselves. I laughed despite myself. I just never thought Richard would be one of them. Eleanor became my first friend in this new chapter of my life. She had never married or had children, dedicating herself instead to her medical career and later to various humanitarian causes. Her perspective was refreshing, unfiltered by conventional expectations of family obligation. You've put your life on hold long enough, she told me during one of our conversations. Now it's your turn to live. By the end of the first week in my motel, I had finally answered one of Richard's increasingly frantic calls. Mom, where are you? We've been worried sick. His voice held genuine concern mixed with irritation. I'm fine, Richard. I found alternative accommodation as you suggested. But where? We went by to check on you yesterday, and all your things were gone. You left a 3-line note. I found myself unmoved by his distress. I'm staying somewhere temporarily while I decide on my next steps. I'll be in touch about seeing Lily and Mason soon. Mom, this isn't like you. If this is about what Vanessa and I suggested, maybe we were too hasty. We can talk about it. We already talked, Richard. You made your position quite clear. Now I'm making mine clear. I'll call you next week. I hung up feeling both sad and empowered. For perhaps the first time in our relationship, I had put my needs ahead of his. It was uncomfortable, but also necessary. The day I closed on my new house was momentous. Caroline handed me the keys with a warm smile and a bottle of champagne. Congratulations, Martha. It's a beautiful home. I walked through each room slowly, envisioning how I would make this space my own. The previous owners had left it in immaculate condition, but the neutral color palette and minimalist decor didn't reflect my personality. I wanted warmth, color, books, and comfortable places to sit and talk. My first major purchase was a plush sectional sofa in a rich teal color for the living room. Then came bookshelves, area rugs, and artwork I had always admired but never felt justified in buying. I found a local interior designer, Sophia, who helped me create a home that was elegant yet inviting, sophisticated without being stuffy. Most of my clients in this neighborhood go for the showroom look, Sophia commented as we selected comfortable reading chairs for the sunroom. It's refreshing to design a space that's actually meant to be lived in. I took my time furnishing the bedrooms, paying special attention to the two I designated for Lily and Mason. I wasn't sure when they would be allowed to visit, but I wanted them to have spaces that reflected their interests and personalities. For Lily, a room with a window seat perfect for reading and drawing. For Mason, a space with built-in storage for his growing collection of action figures and model planes. As my house took shape, so did my new routines. Morning swims in my pool. Coffee on the patio watching hummingbirds visit the feeders I had installed. Afternoons volunteering at the literacy center teaching adults to read. Something I had always wanted to do but never had time for while working. Evening walks through my new neighborhood, gradually nodding hello to neighbors who became familiar faces. Eleanor became a regular visitor, often bringing interesting books or articles she thought I might enjoy. You need to join the country club, she informed me one afternoon over tea in my garden. Not because you care about golf or tennis, but because that's where all the interesting people in this town eventually show up. I laughed at her directness but took her advice. The membership fee that would have been unthinkable in my previous life was now easily affordable. At Eleanor's insistence, I bought new clothes appropriate for my new lifestyle, not extravagant designer labels, but well-made pieces that fit properly and complemented my silver hair and still slim figure. There's no rule that says retired teachers have to dress in shapeless cardigans, Eleanor declared during our shopping expedition. Besides, when you eventually decide to show your son your new life, I want his jaw to hit the floor. Richard continued to call regularly, his tone increasingly conciliatory. I maintained a polite distance, answering his calls but revealing little about my new circumstances. When he suggested meeting for coffee, I declined, citing a busy schedule. Busy with what, Mom? He asked, frustration evident. You're retired. Retired doesn't mean dead, Richard, I replied coolly. I have a life that doesn't revolve around your family now. You wanted that, remember? What I missed desperately was my grandchildren. Lily had called me once from her mother's phone. Her small voice filled with confusion. Grandma, why did you move away? Don't you love us anymore? Her words nearly broke my resolve. Of course I love you, sweetheart. So much. Sometimes grown-ups need to make changes, but it doesn't change how much I love you and Mason. Not ever. After that call, I made a decision. I texted Vanessa directly, something I rarely did. I'd like to see the children this weekend. I could pick them up Saturday morning and return them before dinner. Her response was immediate and surprising. That would be fine. Richard has a golf tournament all day. I can drop them at your location if you provide the address. I hesitated, not yet ready to reveal my new home. Instead, I suggested meeting at the public library downtown. Perfect, she replied. 10 Uhr morgens. Saturday morning I arrived early, watching as Vanessa's luxury SUV pulled into the parking lot. Lily spotted me first, her face lighting up as she bounded out of the car and into my arms. Mason followed more cautiously, but his reserved expression melted when I produced a small gift bag containing a new addition to his airplane collection. Vanessa approached slowly, designer sunglasses hiding her eyes. They've missed you, she said, then added with obvious curiosity. Nice car. Is it new? I had recently purchased a modest but new model sedan, Replacing my 10-year-old vehicle. Yes, a retirement gift to myself, I answered vaguely. I'll have them back by 5. As Vanessa drove away, I turned to my grandchildren with genuine excitement. Who wants ice cream for breakfast? Their delighted gasps were all the answer I needed. After ice cream, we visited the Children's Museum, had lunch at their favorite pizza place, and finally returned to my car. Where are we going now, Grandma? Lily asked, buckling her seatbelt. I thought you might like to see where I live now, I replied casually, watching their reactions in the rearview mirror. The drive to my new neighborhood elicited wide eyes from both children as we passed through the ornate entrance gates and wound our way along tree-lined streets. Do you work here, Grandma? Mason asked, pressing his face against the window. No, sweetheart. I live here. Their amazement only grew as I turned into my driveway and used the remote to open the garage door. This is your house, Lily exclaimed as we entered through the kitchen with its gleaming appliances and marble countertops. It is. And would you like to see your rooms? We have rooms, they chorused in unison. Leading them upstairs, I experienced the joy of watching their faces as they discovered spaces designed just for them. Lily twirled in the center of her room, taking in the bookshelf already stocked with titles I knew she would love. The art supplies arranged on a small desk by the window, the canopy bed with its colorful pillows. Mason raced straight to the window of his room to examine the view of the pool below, then investigated every drawer and shelf of the built-in storage units. This is better than our house, he whispered, almost guiltily. Different, not better, I corrected gently. Now who wants to try out the pool? The afternoon passed in a blur of swimming, exploring the garden, and baking cookies in my new kitchen. I taught Lily how to cut perfect circles in the dough, just as I had once taught her father. Mason helped me arrange chocolate chips in patterns before we slid the trays into the oven. Can we take a picture to show Daddy? Lily asked as we sat by the pool enjoying our freshly baked cookies. Of course, I replied, though I felt a flutter of apprehension. I had planned to introduce Richard to my new circumstances more gradually, but perhaps this was better. The children's innocent perspective would be harder for him to argue with. I helped them take several photos, including a group selfie of the 3 of us lounging by the pool, the house visible in the background. By 5 o'clock, I had reluctantly driven them back to the library where Vanessa was waiting, precisely on time. We went swimming at Grandma's house, Mason announced as soon as he saw his mother. And she has a room just for me with airplane wallpaper. Vanessa's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose above her sunglasses. Is that so? She said, glancing at me with new interest. Perhaps next time I should come too. Perhaps, I said neutrally, hugging my grandchildren goodbye. Thank you for letting me have them today. I was prepared for Richard's call that evening, and it came precisely as I was finishing my dinner on the patio. Mom, what is this house Lily and Mason are talking about? They showed me pictures of some mansion with a pool. Whose place did you take them to? Mine, I replied simply. A long pause followed. That's impossible. Where would you get the money for a house like that? Are you renting a room there or something? No, Richard. I own it. All of it. Another pause. Mom, I think we need to talk. Face to face. Are you having some kind of episode? I almost laughed at his condescending tone. I'm having a wonderful life, actually. But yes, I think it's time we talked. Why don't you and Vanessa come for dinner tomorrow night? 7 o'clock. I'll text you the address. I spent Sunday preparing for Richard and Vanessa's visit. I wanted everything to be perfect, not to impress them exactly, but to leave no room for dismissal or diminishment of what I had accomplished. I arranged for a local catering company to deliver a gourmet meal, set the formal dining table with fine china and crystal I had recently purchased, and selected a bottle of wine from the same vineyard Richard and Vanessa had served the night they asked me to leave. Eleanor called that afternoon. Are you sure you don't want moral support? I could arrive for dessert, provide a buffer. I appreciate the offer, I told her. But this is a conversation that's been 40 years in the making. I need to handle it myself. At precisely 7, the doorbell rang. I smoothed my dress, a simple but elegant navy blue sheath that Eleanor had insisted complemented my figure perfectly, and opened the door. Richard stood on my porch, mouth slightly agape as he took in the magnificent facade of my home. Vanessa stood beside him, her expression a mixture of shock and calculation. "Mom," Richard said, as if uncertain it was really me. "This is where you live now?" "Yes," I replied, stepping back to allow them entry. "Please come in." They followed me through the foyer with its soaring ceiling and crystal chandelier, past the living room with its comfortable but clearly expensive furnishings, and into the formal dining room where the table was already set and appetizers arranged. "Would you like a tour before dinner?" I offered, enjoying their stunned expressions a bit more than was probably charitable. "Mom, I don't understand," Richard said, ignoring my question. "How is this possible? This house must cost just under $2 million, I supplied calmly. "Though I've put another $100,000 into furnishings and landscaping." Vanessa, who had been uncharacteristically silent, finally spoke. "Martha, this is unexpected. Are you working with some kind of reverse mortgage situation?" I smiled, pouring wine into crystal glasses. "No mortgage at all, actually. I paid cash." Richard collapsed into a dining chair, staring at me as if I had suddenly started speaking in tongues. "Cash? Mom, that's impossible. You were a teacher. Dad's life insurance wasn't that much. Where would you get that kind of money?" I took my seat at the head of the table, feeling strangely calm. "Richard, you've never asked about my finances, so I've never discussed them with you. The truth is, I've been investing systematically for over 30 years. I live quite comfortably on my investments and pension." "Investing in what?" Vanessa asked, her interest clearly piqued as she took the seat across from Richard. "Initially mutual funds, then individual stocks as I became more knowledgeable. Real estate investment trusts. Some early tech investments that performed exceptionally well." I sipped my wine. "I also purchased several rental properties over the years, which I sold prior to retirement." Richard was shaking his head in disbelief. "Why didn't you ever say anything? Why did you live so frugally if you had all this money?" The question revealed so much about the gulf between us. "Because the money wasn't the point, Richard. Security was. Independence was. Making sure you had opportunities was. And frankly, I didn't need expensive things to be happy. Until now, apparently," Vanessa murmured, glancing pointedly around the elegant room. "I still don't need them," I corrected her. "But I find I rather enjoy beautiful surroundings at this stage of my life. And more importantly, I can afford them without anyone's help or permission." Richard ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that my heart constricted momentarily. "I just can't believe you kept this secret all these years." "It wasn't a secret, Richard. It simply wasn't relevant to our relationship. I didn't define myself by my net worth, and I didn't want you to either." I paused, meeting his eyes directly. "But when you and Vanessa made it clear you saw me as a financial burden, someone to be managed and placed in a senior facility, it became relevant." Vanessa had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Martha, we never meant to imply." "Yes, you did," I interrupted, surprising all three of us with my directness. "You suggested Sunshine Meadows because you assumed I couldn't afford better. You offered financial assistance because you thought I would need it. You made decisions based on assumptions about my resources without ever asking me directly." Richard's face had turned red. "We were trying to help. We thought. You thought I was a helpless old woman who couldn't manage on her own," I finished for him. "Despite all evidence to the contrary throughout your entire life." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. I decided it was time to move the conversation forward and served the first course, a delicate lobster bisque that steamed gently in fine porcelain bowls. "So exactly how much are you worth, Mom?" Richard finally asked as we ate. I considered deflecting the question but decided on honesty. As of my last quarterly statement, just over $4.7 million. Vanessa's spoon clattered against her bowl. "Million? With an M?" "Yes. Though the market fluctuates, of course." Richard looked as though he might be ill. "All this time you've been a millionaire. And I've been worrying about how you would survive on a teacher's pension. Your concern would have been touching if it hadn't resulted in my eviction," I remarked, perhaps more sharply than intended. The remainder of the meal proceeded in fits and starts of awkward conversation. Vanessa recovered more quickly than Richard, asking increasingly specific questions about my investments, which I answered vaguely. Richard alternated between disbelief, embarrassment, and attempts to justify their previous behavior. "We really did think the senior community would be good for you," he insisted as we moved to the living room for coffee. "It wasn't just about the space in our house." "Richard," I said gently, "I raised you to be honest, especially with yourself. You and Vanessa wanted me gone because I didn't fit into the image of success you're trying to project. I understand that, even if I don't agree with it." "That's not fair, Mom." "Isn't it? When was the last time you invited your teacher colleagues to dinner? Or mentioned to your clients that your mother taught third grade for 40 years? You're embarrassed by my profession, my modest lifestyle. Or at least what you thought was my lifestyle." Vanessa, perhaps sensing the conversation was veering into dangerous territory, stood abruptly. "This has been lovely, Martha, but we should probably get back to relieve the babysitter." Richard seemed reluctant to leave with so much unresolved, but followed his wife's lead. At the door he turned to me, his expression troubled. "Mom, I never meant to hurt you." "I know," I said, and meant it. "But you did. And that's something we'll both have to work through." After they left, I sat alone in my garden, listening to the night sounds and reflecting on the evening. The revelation of my financial status had clearly shocked them both. What remained to be seen was how this new understanding would affect our relationship moving forward. The days following Richard and Vanessa's visit brought a flurry of communication unlike anything I had experienced from them before. Richard called daily, his messages ranging from continued attempts to justify their behavior to awkward apologies. Vanessa sent texts about sales at high-end stores she thought might interest me, apparently assuming my spending habits would immediately change to match my bank account. Most telling was the sudden barrage of invitations. Sunday dinner, of course, but also gallery openings Vanessa thought I might enjoy. A charity luncheon where she was on the committee, even a weekend at their lake house, which I hadn't been invited to in years. When I finally answered one of Richard's calls, his voice was hesitant. "Mom, we'd really love to have you over for dinner this Sunday. The kids miss you terribly." "I miss them too," I replied truthfully. "But Richard, I'm not sure I'm ready for us to pretend everything is normal. I know things have been complicated, but we're family. We should talk about this face to face." I agreed, more for the chance to see my grandchildren than anything else. That Sunday, I drove to their house, noting how different it felt to arrive as a wealthy woman, rather than a supposedly impoverished retiree. The dynamic had shifted in ways I was still processing. Vanessa greeted me at the door with an enthusiastic hug that felt entirely foreign. "Martha, we're so glad you could come. I love that sweater, is it cashmere?" I nodded, somewhat bemused by her newfound interest in my clothing. The living room had been rearranged since my last visit, with my former bedroom door now closed. Richard explained they hadn't converted it yet, almost apologetically. Dinner was a strained affair despite Lily and Mason's excited chatter about their visit to my house. Richard kept trying to steer the conversation toward financial topics, while Vanessa alternated between uncharacteristic warmth toward me and subtle hints about various needs in their lives. "Richard's car is really showing its age," she mentioned casually over dessert. "We've been looking at the new Tesla model, but with the children's private school tuition, it's just not in the budget right now." I smiled politely and changed the subject. After the children were excused from the table, Richard cleared his throat nervously. "Mom, Vanessa and I have been talking. We feel terrible about how things happened. We were wondering if maybe you'd consider moving back in with us. Your old room is still available, and the children would love having you here all the time." I stared at him, momentarily speechless. "Richard, I have a $4 million home with a pool, a garden, and rooms specifically designed for Lily and Mason's visits. Why would I move back into your guest room?" Vanessa jumped in smoothly. "We just thought you might be lonely in that big house all by yourself. Family should stick together. Family should respect each other," I corrected her gently. "And I'm not lonely. I have friends, activities, and a life I'm enjoying tremendously." Richard's expression hardened slightly. "So that's it? You're just going to hold a grudge forever, because we suggested you might be happier in a retirement community?"
No, Richard.
I'm going to live my life on my terms, in my own home, surrounded by people who value me for who I am, not what I'm worth. I softened my tone, seeing the hurt in his eyes. You and your family are always welcome in my home. The children have their own rooms. But I won't be moving back here. And what about financial help? Vanessa asked, abandoning subtlety entirely. You must have planning to do, estate considerations. I had anticipated this question and was prepared. I've already met with my attorney. My estate is structured exactly as I want it. Lily and Mason have trust funds for their education that will become available when they're ready for college. The rest is allocated according to my wishes. The implication that Richard and Vanessa might not be primary beneficiaries hung in the air between us. I hadn't actually made final decisions yet, but their reaction to this deliberate ambiguity was revealing. As I prepared to leave, Richard followed me to my car. Mom, I feel like I don't even know you anymore, he said, his voice tinged with genuine confusion. You never asked, Richard, I replied simply. All these years, you've seen what you expected to see. A simple teacher, a doting mother, a convenient babysitter. You never looked deeper. And now we have an opportunity to build a different relationship. One based on mutual respect rather than your assumptions about what I need from you. The weeks that followed established a new pattern. Richard called less frequently but more meaningfully, our conversations gradually becoming more authentic. Vanessa's transparent attempts to ingratiate herself continued, though I noted she seemed increasingly frustrated by my lack of financial generosity toward them. I established clear boundaries while maintaining regular contact with my grandchildren. They came for weekend sleepovers in their special rooms, swam in the pool, baked cookies in my kitchen, and gradually adjusted to the new normal of our family dynamic. Meanwhile, I met with Gregory to ensure my financial affairs were in proper order. I want to protect my assets, I explained. Not just from market fluctuations, but from potential family claims. Gregory nodded understanding. We should establish trust funds for your grandchildren's education. Funds that neither Richard nor Vanessa can access for other purposes. Exactly, I agreed. And I'd like to explore philanthropic options as well. Perhaps a scholarship fund for teachers pursuing advanced degrees. As summer progressed, I settled more deeply into my new life. I joined several committees at the country club, not because I cared about the prestige as Vanessa might have, but because I discovered I had organizational skills that were valuable to causes I believed in. I expanded my volunteer work at the Literacy Center, drawing on my decades of teaching experience to help design more effective programs for adult learners. And I began, cautiously, to rebuild my relationship with Richard. One evening, he called and asked if we could meet for coffee, just the two of us. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Mom, he said when we were seated at a quiet corner table. About how I've treated you. About the example I've been setting for Lily and Mason. I waited, giving him space to continue. I was wrong, he said finally, meeting my eyes directly. Not just about your finances, but about your value to our family. I treated you like you were disposable once you weren't useful in the ways I wanted. I'm deeply ashamed of that. His words were like a balm to wounds I hadn't fully acknowledged. Thank you for saying that, Richard. I can't undo what happened, he continued. But I want to do better moving forward. For you, for my children, and honestly for myself. I don't like the person I became, and I don't want Lily and Mason to learn those values from me. For the first time since the night he had asked me to leave his home, I reached across the table and took my son's hand. That's a good place to start. 6 months after the revelation of my financial status, I hosted a family dinner at my home. The occasion was Lily's 9th birthday, and I had spent days preparing with Eleanor's help to make it special. The dining room was decorated with balloons and streamers. A professional baker had created a cake in the shape of an open book, reflecting Lily's love of reading. Mason, not to be left out, had helped me arrange a scavenger hunt throughout the garden for after dinner. Richard arrived early to help with final preparations, a gesture that wouldn't have happened in our previous dynamic. Our relationship had gradually healed over the months, not returning to what it had been, but evolving into something different, something more equal. The house looks amazing, Mom, he said as we arranged gift bags for Lily's friends who would be arriving for a pool party the following day. Thank you. It feels like home now. He paused, looking around the sunlit kitchen. You know, I never really understood until recently how much you sacrificed for me growing up. All those years of living frugally, working so hard. I took it for granted. That's what parents do, Richard. We make sacrifices. The mistake was in never talking about money openly, never helping you understand the value of what you had rather than what you lacked. Vanessa arrived with the children, her attitude toward me still a complex mixture of deference and calculation. She had never fully adjusted to the shift in our power dynamic, continuously making subtle references to family obligations and financial assistance that I consistently ignored. Martha, you've outdone yourself, she commented, surveying the elaborate birthday preparations. This must have cost a fortune. It cost exactly what I wanted to spend to make Lily happy, I replied pleasantly, refusing to engage with her fixation on money. Dinner was a joyous affair centered around Lily, her excitement infectious as she opened presents and blew out candles. Mason participated enthusiastically in the celebration, secure in the knowledge that his own birthday in 3 months would receive equal attention. After the children went upstairs to play in their rooms, Richard, Vanessa and I sat in the garden with coffee. The evening was mild, the garden lights creating a peaceful atmosphere as dusk settled around us. Mom, Richard said after a comfortable silence, I've been meaning to ask you something. When did you start investing? How did you learn about it? It was the first time he had shown genuine curiosity about my financial journey rather than just the end result. I told him about Glenda's husband, about the books I had read, about the small amounts I had started with during the leanest years. But how did you have any money to invest? I remember how tight things were sometimes. I made choices, Richard. I bought generic brands. I cut coupons. I drove the same car for nearly 2 decades. I took on extra tutoring during summer breaks. I smiled at memories of those challenging but purposeful years. Every time I got a raise, I increased my investment contributions before changing anything about our lifestyle. Vanessa, who had been listening with unusual attentiveness, shook her head. I could never live that way. Life is meant to be enjoyed in the moment. And I did enjoy it, I assured her. My joy came from watching Richard grow, from my students' progress, from small pleasures that didn't cost much. Financial security gave me freedom, not the other way around. As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave, Richard hugged me tightly. Thank you for everything, Mom. Not just today, but all of it. In the months that followed, our new family dynamic continued to solidify. Richard visited regularly, sometimes without Vanessa, for conversations that grew increasingly open and meaningful. The grandchildren spent so much time at my house that they each had clothing and toys permanently stored in their rooms. My friendship with Eleanor deepened as well. She introduced me to her wide circle of friends, many of whom became important parts of my life. We traveled together, taking a river cruise through Europe that I had dreamed about but never thought I would experience. I also found purpose in giving back. Working with Gregory, I established the Wilson Education Foundation, providing scholarships for teachers in low-income districts to pursue advanced degrees. I funded a reading room at my former elementary school, stocked with books that reflected the diverse backgrounds of the students who would use it. Somewhat to my surprise, I discovered I had a talent for philanthropy, for identifying meaningful ways to use my resources to create lasting change. The foundation became a significant focus of my retirement years, giving me a sense of purpose that went beyond personal comfort or family relationships. One evening, as I sat watching the sunset from my garden, Richard joined me unexpectedly. He had started dropping by without calling first, a casual intimacy that reflected our improving relationship. You seem happy, Mom, he observed, taking the chair beside mine. I am, I confirmed, though not for the reasons you might think. The house? The foundation? Those things are nice, I acknowledged. But what makes me happy is knowing my own worth, Richard. Not just financially, but as a person. For too many years, I measured my value by what I could do for others, how I could meet their expectations. Now I understand that I matter for who I am, not just what I give. He nodded slowly. I'm still learning that lesson myself. We sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to deep purple. I reflected on the journey that had brought me here, from the painful night of rejection to this peaceful moment of self-assurance. The path hadn't been easy. There had been nights of doubt, moments of loneliness, times when I questioned whether severing family ties, even temporarily, had been the right choice. But through that difficult process, I had discovered strengths I never knew I possessed, and built a life that reflected my true self rather than others' expectations. Richard's voice broke into my thoughts. "I'm sorry it took losing you to realize how much you matter, Mom. That's a lesson I don't want Lily and Mason to learn the hard way." "They won't," I assured him, "because they have a grandmother who will always remind them of their inherent value, regardless of what they achieve or possess." As Richard left that evening, I remained in the garden, grateful for the unexpected gifts that had come from what initially seemed like catastrophe. New friendships, deeper self-knowledge, a more authentic relationship with my son, the freedom to define my own worth. The fortune I had carefully built over decades had provided the means for this transformation, but the true wealth was in the wisdom I had gained. No one could evict me from that. If my story resonates with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself with family members who underestimated you? How did you find the courage to assert your boundaries? Please leave a comment below, like this video if it spoke to you, subscribe to hear more stories of resilience, and share with someone who might need this reminder of their own worth. Remember, it's never too late to reclaim your dignity and build the life you deserve. Thank you for joining me on this journey.